Thanks, Mark. I just put together a little, turn the lights off so you can see this. Anyway, as Mark said, I've been the director of the Land Trust for 11 years. Been involved with them on and off since, I guess, '93. And they actually came into existence in 1992. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And as Mark said, we're dedicated towards protecting property in a focused corridor, primarily along the river road. And he already went through our mission statement, so I'm going to skip that for you. But this is that stretch that he's talking about. And really, that was our initial focus, was between Alton and Pere Marquette, but we kind of broadened that sense and focused more on what we call the confluence region, everything from where the Illinois and Mississippi come together to where the Missouri and Mississippi meet, and focus along this area, and even beyond that a little bit. But we have protected over, well, close to 4,000 acres now in one way or another, whether we've purchased property, purchased a conservation easement, or these things were donated to us, or, you know, there's different ways that we do protect property. But we don't necessarily keep it. We don't own all this property. A lot of it we may buy and retain a conservation easement, which means it won't be built upon. It'll stay in its natural state. And then we donate the title of that property to some other entity. The Village of Godfrey has been the recipient of several parcels that have become parks. Also, we've worked with other organizations, the Nature Institute, which is nearby us. They manage the Olin Nature Preserve along the River Road. That'd be this big chunk here. The Oblake Priests have a large piece of property that we hold the easement on. And then Mark was talking about the Boy Scout camp, and that's just a little bit to the north of us. But we have parcels kind of sprinkled all along the river road. This is an older map. There's actually more of them out there now since then. But like I say, we don't necessarily own these properties. We pass them along to some other entity that will then manage them. Like I say, Village of Godfrey, we work with the City of Alton, the town of Brussels over in Calhoun County. We've been working with them, help them establish a park. So it's a variety of things that we do to accomplish our goals. One of the properties that we worked on recently was a property called Palisades. You're familiar with the River Road and where the Raging Rivers Water Park is, just outside of Grafton. We bought, and this is a picture from that site, and this shows the confluence of the Mississippi and Illinois rivers. But we bought a 430-acre piece of property there that we then enrolled as an Illinois Nature Preserve, and then deeded the title to the property to the Lewis and Clark Community College Foundation Board. And then we worked together and wrote up a land management plan with another group that has a facility here on the river, the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center at the Lock and Dam. And they they co-manage the property with the Land Trust, and they're using it as almost like an outdoor laboratory, outdoor classroom. And that they go out and they look at this piece of property and they analyze it, you know, from top to bottom, and look at what's on there, what should be there, what shouldn't be there. And well, for example, out along the river bluffs on this piece of property, there are these unique little prairies, these little patches of prairie. In Illinois, it's called the Prairie State. You think of the big, tall bluegrass prairies and stuff. But these are little hill prairies, and they're totally different from the open prairies. And they have this really unique set of plants. And as these bluffs kind of curve around, you have this southern exposure. The river actually runs east and west instead of north and south here. So you've got this southern exposure, and you have plants that grow here that may not grow in other places of Illinois, like cactus, prickly pear cactus growing up on these knobs. They just recently found a plant called whitlow grass. And it's this little tiny grass, grows maybe an inch tall. It has this little tiny flower. You almost have to get down hands and knees to find it. But it's not found anyplace else in the state of Illinois. They didn't even know it existed here locally until this group started to really analyze it. So it's a unique situation, but like on these bluffs where this is kind of facing to the west, and then you go around the corner and face to the east, you'll have a different set of plants on one side or the other. So there's been a lot of research on that, and we think it's in capable hands. But it's a really large piece of property and a really unique setting. This shows the contours of the property. I was talking about Raging Rivers Water Park. It's right here in the middle. And they kept a kind of a buffer zone around the park in case they wanted to expand their development, and they're talking about it as an ecotourism area to where they have the water park, and in the future they hope to have you know, houses, lodges, and different hiking opportunities to bring the public into this ecological setting, and then utilize some of these trails that exist out in the nature preserve itself. And since that occurred, we also bought another piece of property right next to it. We bought an additional 330 acres that came up for sale right next to it the following year, which was a real stretch. Because this piece of property cost $3.2 million, first of all, and then I spent over $2 million on that. And so it was kind of difficult to do. As a matter of fact, I had to borrow the money to do it. I borrowed the money in a bridge loan from a group called the Conservation Fund on the first $3 million. They gave me 3 years to pay it back, and I paid it back in 1 year. And then the next piece of property, they gave me another $2 million in a loan, and I paid that back in 2 years. So the whole thing is paid off. And before you even ask, no taxpayer dollars. It was all private foundation money. I get asked where the money comes from. And in the 11 years I've been the executive director of Great Rivers Land Trust, we've purchased a lot of property, and we've given away a lot of property. But all of the money that we have spent on buying property has all been private foundations, and a lot of different foundations. Like on this piece of property alone here, I went to 5 different foundations, and it kind of got, you know, one said maybe, so I went to another one, and I told them, well, if you give us money, this group will match it, and then kind of went down the line until I had 5 different foundations sponsor me in buying that piece of property. One of them gave $1.5 million, and the others in different increments. But you know, kind of once you got the ball rolling and they wanted to participate in it, then the others kind of fell in line. So we spent close to $5.5 million just buying those 2 pieces of property. But they're really unique, and now they're set up as an Illinois nature preserve, one of the largest in southern Illinois, that gives access to scientists and the general public, for that matter. One of the other big projects that we were working on was the Piasaw Creek Watershed Project. And the Piasaw Creek comes into the Mississippi River about halfway between Alton and Grafton. And it has a watershed of 78,000 acres. It takes in parts of 3 counties, Jersey, Madison, and Macoupin County. Years ago, I'm going to say in '92, I started working with a group called the American Farmland Trust, and they wanted to do a couple of pilot projects in the country on watershed studies. And at that time, nobody was really looking at watersheds as a whole. You looked at water issues on a county-by-county basis, or a township basis, or soil and water district basis, but not as watersheds as a whole. So they did a pilot project here and one up in Wisconsin where they looked at the whole watershed and pulled together landowners and asked what the problems were, what the solutions were, and how can we fund this and make it work. So this was, like I say, 92, 93 that I worked on that, and the idea was to have a plan in place so that if funding actually became available, we could say, make it a pilot project and put some funding into this. And we did a few little demonstration projects in the early years. And then finally a situation came about that really kicked this off. In the flood of '93, the Illinois American Water Company had a water plant that sat on the river just outside of Alton. Big brick buildings, right on the river's edge. And it had been operating for over 100 years. And what they did is they would draw the water out of the Mississippi River, filter it, sell the clean water to everybody in the community, and then the sediment that they filtered out, they put back into the river where it came from. And they'd literally been doing that for over 100 years. And then the flood of '93 came along and destroyed their plant. So they built a new one up on top of the bluff, high enough they'd be out of the reach of the flood. And they were ready to go operational, with the EPA stepped in and said, by the way, you're not going to be grandfathered in on your discharge permit to keep doing what you've been doing. And you're going to have to build additional facilities here, lagoons, that will let this material settle out, dredge it out, load it into trucks, haul it to a landfill, and bury the dirt. The water company didn't want to do that because it was going to cost them about $27 million to build it, and almost $1 million a year to maintain it. And so the big friction here was between the EPA and the water company. Finally, the water company, who were just down the road from us, were familiar with this watershed plan that we put together a few years back, and they went to the EPA and said, look, if you'll give us our discharge permit to let us keep doing what we've been doing for 100 years, we will fund the implementation of this project that will reduce sediment coming into the Mississippi River just above our intake 2 to 1 compared to what we put into it. And it was calculated that this water plant would filter out sediment to the tune of 3,300 tons per year that they'd be taking out and putting back into the river. So they went to a neutral third party, which was the land trust, and said, we'll give you this money to implement this plan, but you have to reduce sediment coming into the Mississippi River by 6,600 tons on a sustainable level by the end of a 10-year period. I said, sure. So they gave us $4.1 million to go about this and implement the plan. And at the time, I wasn't actually working for the land trust. I'd gone on to another group, but the EPA said, we'll do this if you hire the guy who wrote the plan. So they bring me back, and I figure I got a job for 10 years as this watershed coordinator, but early on I switched over to be an executive director and went ahead and implemented this plan. The first thing we had to do is to do a geomorphic inventory assessment. We had to hire a fluvial geomorphologist, is what the EPA said we had to have. I said, sure, no problem. As it turns out, are there any fluvial geomorphologists in the room? There aren't a lot of them around. So anyway, we tracked one down. He came in and did this 20-pound report on the condition of the watershed. But it turned out to be a very good thing. It gave us a snapshot of the existing condition of the watershed and where the most work needed to be done. And that work was primarily in the agricultural community because that's where the most erosion came from. And then it also targeted what types of erosion, whether sheet and rill, gully erosion, stream bank erosion, this kind of thing. And we could really target areas. And it turns out the big area was in farm fields along the edge of the field, close to the woods, where they had gully erosion. So we focused on that. And I started working together with the soil and water conservation districts and went out and looked at different projects, determined which ones had the best opportunities for soil savings, which ones would be cheapest to build, and things like that. And we did a few demonstration projects to get the ball rolling, and by the time we were into like third or fourth year, we had a waiting list that we could pick and choose the projects that we wanted. And we were providing financial incentives to landowners where we paid a portion, not everything. The landowner had to put something back into it as an incentive to take care of it. But we built dry dams, and we built sediment basins, terraces, we built grass waterways, block chutes, whatever the best management practice for that particular project was. These are some examples of some of them. We built a huge retention basin up at the Godfrey Park, Glazebrook Park. We built another, I'm trying to think of high visibility ones that you may have seen. The middle of the Brighton Park, there's a great big retention basin there. Also on Lewis and Clark campus we did a basin and pool and ripple project. So they're all over the place. We've built over 300 structures over the years. The bottom line is we hit our goal in the 6th year and doubled it by the time the project was done. One of the big projects along the way was the Boy Scout camp that Mark was talking about. And the Boy Scout camp had a lake that had silted in, and they were trying to restore it, and they were selling dirt out of it, different things. But the Boy Scout camp is in the middle of the Piesau Creek watershed. So there was talk that they may sell the camp or maybe relocate the Boy Scouts, different things. And we hated to see that happen, but we couldn't buy it. But we said that we would work with you and that we would restore the lake in exchange for a conservation easement on the camp. And the camp's approximately 250 acres. And if we tried to buy that, it probably would have been in millions of dollars. But in exchange for restoring the lake, which we did, we removed 140,000 cubic yards of sediment. And the lake's been restored. It's approximately 20 feet deep to us reach. And then up above it, we constructed a wetland area, about a 15 to 20 acre wetland, that'll trap this sediment and keep it from happening again, where it filled up in, 35 years. The engineers estimated it would take 100 to 120 years for it to even start to silt in. And with this wetland, you can clean it out and it can fill up again. So the end result was we got a 250 acre tract protected from development at a fraction of what it would cost to buy it. The Boy Scouts got their lake restored, looks beautiful, And also, we got sediment numbers going into the Piesaw Creek Watershed Project. So it was a win-win for everybody that was involved in this particular thing. And it's my understanding that participation at the camp has risen dramatically since the lake was restored, and they've also installed docks, and it's a beautiful place again now. But it took a while. It took a couple of years, a lot of digging, and we had to reconstruct, and there it is, the final result. That's the way it looks today. But it was a terrific project. But it was one that led to another. What do I have, a couple minutes left?
Sure. 2 or 3.
While we were working with the Boy Scouts, they said, we'll do this project, but look at the properties around it for potential buffers. And as we got to looking at those, we also found out there was an Underground Railroad site. So we got a grant to do an archaeological study down in the area, and it turns out that it was an Underground Railroad site, and as runaway slaves would leave Missouri, they would come over to Illinois and find a safe haven and then move on to the next safe haven and the next safe haven. But in this particular area, this steep wooded valley here, this is the Boy Scout Lake here, this is the watershed, they stayed here and lived here, and during the archaeological study, they found over 100 different home sites and wells and cemeteries that belonged to these runaway slaves. And they stayed and lived there and bought land and developed this little community in the Fort Creek area. And so we, like I say, got a grant to do an archaeological study and got it designated as a Network of Freedom Underground Railroad site, not too far, one of only 7 in the state of Illinois, which opened it up to other funding sources too. So now we're erecting a kiosk and informational booth down along the River Road at the mouth of Piesaw Harbor. We're working over in Missouri too. Mark asked if we expanded. I've been working over in Missouri with a group of fox hunters. They used to have a piece of property in St. Louis. They got crowded in, so they sold their small piece of property and bought a bigger piece of property up in Lincoln County, 1,400 acres, has a conservation easement on it. It's this piece right here. And then the land trust has bought property next to it, utilizing there's a cross-country pipeline. It's going, a multi-use pipeline going across the country. It's called the Rocky Express Pipeline. And as they've been going through the area, they tear up different things, whether it's forest or wetland or whatever, but they set aside a grant fund to offset what they've destroyed by protecting something else. And I ended up writing a grant, and they had $180,000 in this grant fund. I asked for $140,000 because I didn't want it all. It seemed like I was being a hog. And they gave me the $140,000 to buy this piece of property I had my eye on next to it to create a buffer around the fox hunting club, who also have a conservation easement already. And they called me and said, "You got the grant." And I said, "Well, that's great." I said, "What's going to happen to the other $40,000 that you guys had?" And the woman, she was calling from Washington, said, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "Your website said you had 180. I've got 140. I could hear her whispering in the background. She said, "You're right. There is another $40,000. I said, "Can I have it?" And she kind of laughed. She said, "What are you going to do with it?" And I said, "Just buy some more land." And they called back the next day and said, "Yeah, you can have it." The other big project, and this is my last one, is Piesaw Harbor, which is right at the mouth of Piesaw Creek. It was this big complex. There's 55 acres right here. Had a gas station. There was like a country store, a gun shop, boat shop, a warehouse, and a bunch of other, well, about 50 years of junk piled up on it. We bought that as part of our vision. It was one of the very first projects we wanted to do to work on the aesthetics of the River Road. And the other thing is the River Road is a beautiful drive, one of the best in the state of Illinois, but it's basically a guardrail that runs from Alton to Grafton, and there are very, very few places for you to pull over and interact with the river. We've cleaned up this site now, where we have this large building here, 27,000 square foot building that we're going to share with the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center to house visiting professors who are doing research on the river. I'm changing the gas station over to a 24-hour-a-day operation, unattended. I just retrofitted the canopy, and we've changed it over to a Fuel 24 station. And I'm continuing to operate the boat harbor for day activities, but I just also finished taking 10 acres out here on the riverfront and converted it to a riverfront park. Cleared out all the undergrowth that had been growing for 30 years, all the junk, and I just sowed grass. It's coming out green, real beautiful, and this spring it should be terrific. But this will allow opportunities for people to come in. They can picnic, they can fish, they can dip their toe in the Mississippi River, they can watch eagles, they can do all these things, and actually have a place to do it safely off the highway. So That's one of the things. I also have a couple of nature trails that I'm about halfway done with. Next year, this will be a destination site halfway along this Great River Road. And you can also stop and get gas, too. But this facility cost $2.2 million. It went up for sale. We bought it. $2.2 million. I got a grant for $1.3 million to pay off, one, a bridge loan, plus I also have a loan with the local bank, Bank of Edwardsville. I paid off part of that. The income from the boat docks will then sustain my remaining payments and maintenance of the facility, so it's self-sustaining, and it will be open to the public as well. So that's my latest adventure. It's about half cooked, but I'm getting there. Pretty close.